This morning began like many others, blurry with exhaustion. My 2-year-old son had woken up multiple times during the night, crying and restless. My husband and I have learned over time that if our son sees us while he's trying to go back to sleep, it only makes it harder for him to settle down. So as usual, I got up and moved to the guest bedroom, hoping the extra distance might help. But it didn't. Even after the move, I kept hearing him stir through the baby monitor. The soft static of the device became a soundtrack for my night. I checked on him every time he cried, trying to soothe him back to sleep, whispering comforting words into the dark. Still, he'd wake again. The anxiety of hearing him struggle, paired with the lack of sleep, had already drained me before the sun rose. By 8:30 a.m., my husband finally woke up. That's a late morning for him, and I assumed, maybe even hoped, he'd notice how drained I looked and offer to take our son downstairs so I could rest a little longer. But that wasn't what happened. Instead, he stayed in bed with us, wanting to spend a playful moment with our son. I was on edge, but I didn't say anything. I didn't want to ruin the moment. My son climbed onto the bed, cheerful and energized, so unaware of the weight I was carrying. Then it happened in an instant. He jumped directly onto my lower abdomen, more specifically, a sensitive spot that made me cry out in pain. The jolt was so sharp, so unexpected, that my body reacted before my mind did. I pushed him off me, not with intention to harm, but with an instinctual, protective motion. My muscles acted before I could soften the gesture, and then I heard my husband yell. He had seen the push, not the pain, not the involuntary wince, not the tears that immediately filled my eyes, just the push. He screamed at me, accusing me of hurting our son. The sound of his voice was thunderous, sharp, and full of rage. Before I could gather my thoughts to explain, he started hitting me, repeatedly. On my arms, my shoulders. I froze. I had never seen him like this. I couldn't even defend myself. I was too stunned. The pain wasn't just physical, it was the kind that seeps into your bones, not just from bruises, but from betrayal. The man I loved, the father of my child, was hurting me. Eventually, it stopped. I don't remember how. My arms were throbbing. My left shoulder was already beginning to swell. When I could finally speak, I asked him to leave. I needed space. I needed him gone. But he didn't just leave. He left with our son, yelling that this was my fault, that I was to blame for everything. He took our son while still full of anger. I couldn't even get a proper look at my child to see if he was okay. Was he frightened? Was he hurt when I pushed him? I didn't know. And that uncertainty just added another layer to the storm brewing inside me. I sat in the silence of the house, listening to the absence of their presence. I stared at the bruises forming on my arm. I touched my shoulder gently, flinching at the pain. My mind spiraled with questions I didn't know how to answer. Was this domestic violence? It felt strange to even ask. It shouldn't feel strange. I know that now. But when you're inside the moment, when your heart is tangled up with the person who hurt you, clarity is hard to come by. He didn't punch me in the face. He didn't throw me against a wall. He didn't break anything. But he punched me, more than once, with enough force to leave marks. And even if his anger came from a place of protectiveness for our son, does that justify what he did? Deep down, I think I knew the answer. But it was still too raw to face. I tried to distract myself, to focus on lunch. Hours had passed, and my body was still aching, but the hunger was louder now. I moved downstairs, carefully, every movement reminding me of what had happened earlier. That's when I saw him again. He had come back. Our son was with him, smiling, giggling, like the morning hadn't happened at all. Children are blessed like that sometimes. Their minds can be so beautifully resilient. My husband looked at me, and for the first time that day, the anger in his eyes was gone. He looked tired. He told me we both needed to apologize. Both, he said. I didn't say anything at first. I just rolled up my sleeve and showed him my arms. The bruises had already started darkening into shades of purple and red. I didn't need to say a word. He just looked. His expression shifted, confusion, guilt, something unreadable. He left the room for a moment and came back with a cold patch. He handed it to me gently, like that act could undo the morning, like that gesture could rebuild what had broken. But when I tried to talk about it, to ask why he had lost control like that, he shut down. He didn't want to discuss it. Just like that, it was supposed to be over. But for me, it wasn't. I couldn't stop replaying the moment. I couldn't stop hearing his voice, raised and full of rage. I couldn't unfeel the impact of his fists. And the worst part? I couldn't look at him the same way anymore. That night, I didn't sleep. I laid in bed, alone, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of what had happened. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it again. My husband's face twisted in anger, his hands curled into fists, the coldness in his voice when he blamed me. And worse, the silence after. The kind of silence that isn't peaceful, it's heavy, full of everything unsaid. He stayed in our son's room that night. I didn't ask him to, but I also didn't ask him to come back. I needed space. I needed to feel safe. But how could I feel safe in a house where something like that had happened? The next morning, I went into the bathroom to check the damage again. The bruises were more vivid now, deep purple blotches painted across my skin. I touched them gently and felt the sting. But what hurt more was what I couldn't see. The doubt, the confusion, the fear. I kept thinking, was I overreacting? I had pushed our son, and maybe it looked harsh. Maybe that triggered something in my husband. But I hadn't meant to hurt our child. It was instinct, pure, panicked instinct, a reaction to a sudden, sharp pain. Was it possible my husband just didn't understand? Was he protecting our son the only way he knew how? But then I'd remember the fists, the way he didn't pause, the way he didn't try to talk first, the fact that this wasn't the first time he had hurt me. Yes, this time was different. This time was violent. But there had been signs before, little moments I had brushed off. Times when he grabbed my wrist too tightly during arguments. Times when he slammed a door so hard it made me flinch. Times when I'd walk away feeling like something wasn't right, but convinced myself I was being too sensitive. Now, I wasn't so sure. Later that day, we had a calm moment together while our son napped. I brought it up. I told him I couldn't just pretend it didn't happen, that I couldn't brush it off with an ice pack and a half-hearted apology. He looked at me, defeated, and said, "I'm under a lot of stress. Work's been overwhelming. I just snapped." I listened. I wanted to understand. But the truth is, stress doesn't excuse violence. Pressure doesn't give anyone the right to hurt the people they love. And love, real love, should never make you afraid. He said he was sorry again. He promised it wouldn't happen again. But I needed more than promises. I needed action. Asked him if he would consider going to therapy. Not just for us, but for himself. For our family. For our son. Because what happened that morning couldn't be repeated. He agreed, reluctantly, but he agreed. Still, a voice in the back of my mind kept whispering, "What if it happens again?" That voice has grown louder with each passing hour. We went about the rest of the day in a strange routine. Cooking, playing with our son, watching a show together in silence. On the outside, it might have looked normal, but inside, everything had changed. Every time he reached out to touch me, I flinched, not visibly, but inside. I didn't want to feel that way. I didn't want to be scared of the man I loved. But my body remembered what my mind was trying to forget. At one point, I asked him if he thought he needed help managing his anger. He looked away and said, "Maybe." That's not enough. Maybe isn't enough. Not when safety is on the line. I found myself looking up articles online, stories from other women who had been through similar things. Some had stayed, some had left, some had regrets, some had rebuilt their lives. The one thing they all had in common? They all said the first time was a warning. And I couldn't ignore mine anymore. Our son is young, but he's always watching. One day, he'll understand. One day, he might remember. And I don't want his memory of his parents to include fear, shouting, or bruises. I don't want him to grow up thinking this is what love looks like. That night after he went to bed, I started journaling everything, every detail, every word. I needed to document it, not just in case, but to see it laid out clearly. Because when you're inside the storm, it's hard to tell which way is out. I still haven't decided what to do. I haven't told anyone, not my parents, not my friends. It feels too raw, too complicated. I know what some people would say, leave. But it's never that easy when your life, your child, your love are all intertwined. Still, I can't ignore what happened, and I won't. The following week passed like we were walking on glass. Every conversation was careful, calculated. We avoided anything too deep, too emotional. Our son seemed unaffected on the surface, happily playing, but I could sense he felt the tension too. Kids always do. One night, I heard our son cry out and I rushed to his room before my husband could. I didn't want to take any chances. Not that my husband would hurt him, but was there now, and that's the problem. When trust is cracked, even the gentlest touch feels suspicious. That moment made me realize something painful. I no longer trusted the man I built a life with. He started therapy. A few sessions in, he came home and said it was harder than he thought. He didn't say much else, but I saw he was tired, mentally, emotionally. I wanted to be supportive, but it was hard to give comfort when I hadn't received any myself. His apology felt unfinished, his remorse more like regret that he got caught in the act rather than regret for doing it. One evening I told him I needed space, that I would take our son and spend a few nights at my sister's house. He went quiet. Then he asked, "Is this it? Are you leaving me?" I didn't answer. I didn't know the answer. At my sister's, I felt relief. Not joy, just relief. Like my body could finally breathe. I slept without flinching. I woke up without fear. My son laughed freely, the sound echoing through the house like music I hadn't realized. I missed. During those days away, I reflected on everything. How many times I'd made excuses, how often I'd suppressed my discomfort, how deeply I had convinced myself things were fine. But they weren't fine. They hadn't been for a while. I realized I had been in survival mode for longer than I thought. Managing his moods, walking on eggshells during his stressful weeks at work, pretending the accidental bruises were nothing. That morning, when he hit me, wasn't an isolated incident. It was a culmination. I finally opened up to my sister. She listened without judgment. When I finished, she hugged me and said, "You didn't deserve that. Neither does your son." And for the first time in a long while, I believed her. When I returned home, I sat him down. I told him everything. How scared I had been, how alone I felt, how long I had been covering for him, even to myself. He didn't interrupt. He just listened. Then he said, "I don't want to lose you, but I understand if I already have." I told him I wasn't ready to make a decision yet, that I needed to see true change, not just promises or temporary guilt, that I needed him to take responsibility, not just for what happened, but for everything leading up to it. We agreed to continue therapy, both individually and as a couple. He's still in the house, but things are different now. I set boundaries. I started keeping a journal of our interactions. I also reached out to a domestic violence counselor, not necessarily because I plan to leave, but because I need to be prepared, informed, empowered. I'm not sharing this because I want sympathy. I'm sharing this because someone might read it and see themselves in my story. Because abuse isn't always a black eye or a broken bone. Sometimes it's slow. It creeps in through apologies, stress, and silence. It hides behind phrases like, "he didn't mean it," or "it was just once." But once is enough. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe we'll heal. Maybe we'll separate. But either way, I'm not staying silent anymore, and I won't let my son grow up thinking love means fear. If you're reading this and wondering if what you're going through is bad enough to ask for help, please know that it is. Your feelings are valid, your safety matters, and you deserve peace. I'm finding mine, one hard step at a time.